Whoa. Ah. Who am I looking at here? Oh, Moeka. Oh. I mean, she certainly looks different. But this... Yeah. She's having her Kratos moment. Huh. Quite a different looking Kiryu Moeka. Interesting, as far as the timeline is concerned. You've got to explain, man. Oh, he's getting there now, to that point. But that's all you have to do. Just, look at that. Switch to that instead of necrosis. Program cell self-destruction, right? Oh my god. Look at this. It's so calculated and cold at this point. Out of necessity, perhaps. Oh man, this oh. Exactly. All you have to do is approach her. But that was a building rooftop in the cold open, right? Oh. Couldn't find any relatives to contact. My god, the score. Ugh. The tone is completely different. But yeah, I think he just realized as well. Can't just time leap yet. Oh. Wow. He's become so numb to it. Whoa. I just got chills. You know, it kind of feels like a Kiyoshi Kurosawa film. Like a specter in a corner. Oh yeah, this feels like Kiyoshi Kurosawa to me. Inspiration. Okay. That checks out. But again, the cold open is on a building top. Much higher. Different scenes, I believe. She didn't even notice. Someone just walked right in. There. He knows. He understands. Oh my god, the desperation though. Look at that. Ah. Look at this night and day. This is it, isn't it? Oh. She's like an addict. This is quite a disturbed individual. I think Okabe sees it as well now. There it is. It's time to face it. Yeah, it's quite the commotion, man. Ah, right. There's that as well, I suppose. He just clocked it. So that means... Come on, Okabe, come on. Okay. Like a banshee. Like he took a baby away from its mother. Okay, this is insane amounts of noise at this point. That's a desperate person, man. She'll do anything. Okay, let's see, man. Let's see. She'll do almost anything, but she'll, yeah. Wow. Okabe sees that now. Listen, I do pity Kitty Moeka. It's time for a harsh reality check. But how do you know that though? Why do you believe that? Whoa. Whoa. Interesting choice stylistically. The sound effect. Ah. It's from the past. It was a flashback. 2006. A mother. I mean, exactly. That's a mother figure, you say. Like the hand of God from the brink. Low-hanging fruit, essentially. It's deliberate. The radio silence. Interesting approach, harsh approach, but Okabe knows it's needed. Whoa. Wow. That's so raw and authentic. And look at that release. Okabe, maybe you got your breakthrough there. Oh. Wow. Yeah. This FB person, oh, I'm sorry. They did a number on her. That much they make clear really early on, right? Yeah. Yeah. She just couldn't even see it. She had it. Okay. Oh man, look at that. My goodness, this episode is phenomenal. It's gotta come straight from FB. Yeah, I mean, she's been discarded. Much like Mayuri's. Ah. A glimmer of hope and light in those eyes all of a sudden. That's something real right there, Kiryu. The breakthrough moment. That felt real. Okay, that's quite the ending, isn't it? To quite an episode. It's an excellent episode. Hell, I think it's actually one of the best episodes of the series. Just top to bottom. It really is quite exceptional. I believe. And of course, I'll get into all of that. But yeah, that conclusion, that feels like it's the real deal. That this is the breakthrough that Okurin has been hoping for, throughout this episode. And he tries, right? It's a unique approach, right? Quite a unique approach. Much to get into. But that right there in the end does feel like a breakthrough. I don't think she's deceiving Okurin at this point. This information about the coin locker, right? And the IBN 5100. I think this is legitimate information that she's giving to Okurin. Because again, like I said, it appears that she has come to. It took quite the effort on Okurin's end, on Okurin's part, right? And it was needed. She needed a third party, someone like Okabe, to step in, right? And give her essentially quite a harsh reality check, because Okurin, even though, there's his own personal feelings, right? Given the things that play out with Mayuri and Moika's hand and all of that. So yes, there's incredibly personal feelings at play here, right? And Okurin lashes out, right? He has a go, and then some. But even so, he's able to kind of, keep his emotions in check and understand, the things that this person has gone through and is going through. And that ultimately, she's a puppet. She's a puppet that's latched on like a lost puppy. A puppet that is just petrified of losing that connection, that correspondence, that dependence, that bond, that perceived bond of this mother figure, apparently. Now, okay, let's quickly touch on that. This idea of FB actually being a mother figure, right? That's got to be by design as well. I truly think everything that's done here on FB's end is deliberate and calculated since day one, since that email goes out, right? That message goes out, looking for people, right? Up on that rooftop, as Kiryu Moika is ready to just check out, right? Because you see that someone like her felt that there's nothing here for her. And, once again, this reoccurring theme of suicide is front and center, right? It's interesting, isn't it? The focus on that, throughout the story. But yeah, you see at her lowest, it's low-hanging fruit, essentially, for FB and FB's people and all of that, right? I'm going to go ahead and assume it's like a mass email that's, being sent out, right? They're phishing. Essentially, they're phishing, and they're looking for people just like Kiryu Moeka, right? Easy pickings. Someone like Kiryu Moeka, given, her state of mind, her mental state and all of that. This is a deeply troubled individual, right? With a manipulated personality, right? A lot of the things that are caused or put into motion are caused by her deeply troubled and manipulated personality, right? Listen, it certainly sheds a lot of light onto Kiryu Moeka, right? And the character of Kiryu Moeka, and, her actions and the things that lead to her actions. And, through that, once again, the moral complexity of Steins Gate and its characters take center stage here. Because, you do gain a new perspective on Kiryu Moeka, right? Now, yes, I've kind of dabbled in some of these things, going all the way back to her first appearance even, right? How dependent she is on her phone. And then, of course, a little bit later on, a couple of episodes later, more than a couple of episodes later, perhaps, the introduction of this FB individual, right? And her attachment to this FB individual. And then, I remember taking a deep dive into that, right? The dependence, that aspect is clear. It is. But now you really, really, truly get the understanding of it. A new understanding of it. I mean, at the end of the day, this FB person is a master manipulator, right? And I kind of forgot about that ending I'm speaking of, the coin locker and all of that. One of the questions I immediately had, was, is FB about to show up themselves, right? To that coin locker, right? To retrieve the IBN 5100. I mean, realistically speaking, right? Logically speaking, no chance in hell, right? It's highly likely that, FB is going to send yet another lackey, right? Yet another expendable, disposable individual that might have latched on, right? Much like Kiryu Moeka, right? Why go do the dirty work yourself, the footwork yourself, if you can send these lackeys, right? If you can get people like Kiryu Moeka do your bidding. But, going back to FB and, the master manipulator aspect of it, listen, this is... I almost said this is not a good person. And I know some people might be like, I mean, yeah, that's not something controversial. Some might say immediately, this is not a good person. And yes, whoever this person is, they're capable of some terrible things, right? Putting into motion some terrible things. But so is Kiryu Moeka, right? Kiryu Moeka is capable of murder. And yet again, after being confronted, she still maintains that, yes, for FB, I could kill a person. I would kill a person. I mean, just a few moments ago, I paid tribute to the moral complexity of Steins Gate, right? And the moral complexity of its characters, right? Taking center stage throughout this episode. So can I just, outright say that, FB is a downright, piece of shit, terrible person? Listen, man, I'm not able to say that just yet. Yes, this is a person who's capable of all of these things, right? Capable of terrible things. But much like everyone else, much like Kiryu Moeka, I'm sure that this FB person has their own story, right? Context, their own struggles. Everyone has their own struggles, right? And that could easily apply to someone like FB as well. And the thing that excites me is that it appears I'm kind of around the corner at this point, right? And finally potentially getting to meet FB, right? And not just me, right? Of course, Okabe as well. But then you also have Kiryu Moeka, right? Who's kind of had a bit of a breakthrough at this point. So if you look at, or that breakthrough aside, potentially kind of getting to meet FB or coming face to face with FB, right? Hopefully alongside Okabe, right? Hopefully, she has that support system. I mean, I say that loosely. I'm not claiming that, Okabe has now become her support system, kind of taking over from FB. Not quite, but, If she's around Okabe, that's something, isn't it? Unless, of course, Moika doesn't join him and doesn't play any part in, the next part of the story. The coin locker and IBN and all of that, right? And FB, potentially and essentially being imminent now in terms of being, a part of the story proper, right? Maybe a full-on reveal could be ahead of me here. But, the point I was trying to make here is that if Kiryu Moika is a part of this and she does kind of get to come face to face with FB, that's a bit of a different story, isn't it? Right? I'm not able to say for sure that, Kiryu Moika is not going to have a different type of reaction if she is able to come face to face with FB, right? This mother figure. And again, I should probably finish my point, right? It feels like a mother figure because clearly FB has, latched onto that or understood that this is, this is the role that Kiryu Moika needs in her life, or this is the type of person that she needs in her life. You see the cops earlier mention that, they're at a loss, right? Because they didn't know who to contact, right? They specified that for a reason earlier on in the episode, right? That there's no family, there's no one else in her life, right? And this right here, a mother figure, might have been just the thing that she really truly needed in her life. And you see someone like FB, clearly someone highly intelligent and quite seasoned in this type of thing, right? Manipulating and, grabbing these types of people. And then again, manipulating them further to do their bidding, right? To the point that you can get them to kill someone on your behalf, right? It always goes back to those moments that linger on Kiryu Moika's expression on her face, right? You see then and there that she didn't want to do it. She didn't want to murder Mayuri, right? But something else is driving her to it, and that something else being FB, right? I believe the line of dialogue there under her breath was for FB, for FB. So for FB, she'll do anything. Even now, she's adamant that she would kill someone if FB asked, right? And you see Ocarina is just kind of baffled, right? And I believe he said, even if you know you're being used. I mean, this FB person has done a number on Kiryu Moika, right? And worked on Kiryu Moika. The initial email is from 2006, right? So there's a lot of time and effort put into this. In grooming Kiryu Moika, in manipulating Kiryu Moika. And listen, before I go any further, let me establish my opinion of Kiryu Moika, right? At this point in time, after watching this episode, this person, Kiryu Moika, is not a bad person. I don't think she's inherently a bad person. I think that much is clear to anyone. I think after the end of this episode, by the time you kind of get to learn everything about Kiryu Moika and how she got to this point. But this is someone who is capable of bad choices, much like anyone else, right? I don't think I'm a bad person, but I'm also capable of bad choices, much like anyone else, right? Now, of course, the choices that Kiryu Moika ends up making can, lean towards the extreme end, right? Killing someone, murdering someone, on FB's behalf, on FB's orders, right? Because FB is all. Because FB is my all. Because FB is everything. So yes, I'm not outright excusing her choices. But I am saying that, this is a deeply troubled individual, right? Who's really, really rather susceptible to manipulation. And that's exactly how it plays out. FB took advantage of this person. Listen, like I said, everything here is deliberate. Not only use her and groom her for all of these years, to then discard her, knowing exactly how it's going to play out for her, exactly how she'll react to this, right? And beyond knowing, hoping for that outcome exactly, right? As both Okabe and I find out together, as he does kind of go to that apartment complex, yeah, she checked out. And that is exactly the thing FB hoped for, right? And not just hoped for, this FB person is more than likely pretty sure that this is exactly how she'll, react to this, right? This radio silence all of a sudden. So, this level of manipulation is kind of unforgivable, isn't it? This is dark stuff here, right? Knowing exactly how this person is going to react and driving this person to that point, almost as if, there's no use for it. I mean, that's a given, right? You can just understand that they feel like there's no more use for Kiryu Moika, but it doesn't stop at that. They also kind of make sure that this person takes themselves out of the equation as well. And of course, I certainly had my own grudge against Kiryu Moika as well, right? Given the things that she facilitates as far as Mayuri is concerned. But at no point did I consider it like an open and shut case that, no, this is it. I cannot stand Kiryu Moika. I don't care for any explanations or any context. Nope. That's it. Fuck her. Listen, I'm sure, that mentality, that approach might have been at play for many people, right? As far as Kiryu Moika is concerned, like kind of like a point of no return, like the unforgivable act of facilitating the murder of Mayuri. And I'm sure that around the time Okabe lashes out, right, gets to that point that he just simply has to lash out and, give her a little something, right? And he strikes her twice and he does not hold back. And listen, I'm sure, once that release happens, right, once Okabe reaches that boiling point and lashes out and strikes her, I'm sure, it must have been a cathartic experience for many of you, for many people, right? I'm sure many people cheered. And yes, in the moment, it most definitely must have been cathartic for Ocarina as well, right? Because this is something he must have been carrying and thinking about for some time now. Again, given his really unique situation as well, right? The time leaps, the countless numbers of time leaps, and reliving certain things over and over again, right? Of course, Okabe Rintaro carries a deep hatred, disdain for Kiryu Moika, right? And again, it all concludes with him lashing out in that moment, right? I'll never forgive you, as it flashes to Kiryu Moika in her, secret agent outfit, right? A totally different type of Kiryu Moika. I mean, it almost feels kind of bizarre that, that Kiryu Moika could actually pull that off. I mean, it actually feels impossible, doesn't it? That's the same Kiryu Moika, right? That somehow, walks in and looks ominous and menacing and is able to actually execute an operation such as that one, right? Leading these rounders and all of that. I mean, that right there, Kiryu Moika in her, black suit, walking in, gun in hand, looking like that and behaving in that manner, quite put together, quite professional, again, quite menacing and in control. All of that is facilitated by FB, right? She gains that confidence. She's able to execute that operation because of someone like FB, right? So it's night and day. That Kiryu Moika that walked into the Future Gadgets lab, and then the Kiryu Moika, the desperate, the troubled Kiryu Moika I see here in this episode, and that Okabe gets to see here. And listen, yes, Okabe, gets that aspect of it out. He lashes out, he strikes her. I'll never forgive you. But Okabe Rintaro is an intelligent person. This is an intelligent character. He sees it on display really early on as well. Once he first enters the apartment room or the apartment itself, he notices that, okay, this is a troubled individual, right? He almost immediately picks up on it. That this is someone that's being used by this FB person, right? There's a few tight shots of Okabe's face, his expressions. You see that he's baffled, right? And in those moments, he understands, okay, this person is someone that's been manipulated as well. And then, of course, Okabe ends up taking quite a unique approach in terms of possibly, breaking her out of it. But, returning to the episode as a whole, I just enjoyed this so much, just top to bottom. Especially the execution of this episode, the tone of this episode. It's quite the tonal shift, in comparison to the last episode, right? And certainly a bit more in line with perhaps this phase of the story, right? The tone of this episode specifically. And it really establishes that really distinct tone right up front, right? It grabs you up front in that cold open, right? And it holds you there. And like I said during the episode, this actually legitimately reminded me of a Kiyoshi Kurosawa film. And, I simply would not be surprised if that is some of the inspiration here. And I've certainly seen and felt the Kiyoshi Kurosawa inspiration in other anime as well. Specifically Monster. Monster, I mean, it's really there. You really kind of, feel it in Monster or throughout Monster. Again, specifically Monster because of the subject matter at play. I mean, this episode really kind of leans into the psychological thriller, even psychological horror aspects, right? Specifically with Moeka and how she's presented. There is a tinge of that intoxicating, suffocating atmosphere that I love about Kiyoshi Kurosawa films so much. I mean, let's look at the scene and the shots of Okarine arriving at the apartment complex, right? And of course, the score as well. Really deliberate choices there, right? As far as, the psychological thriller and psychological horror aspect of it, right? The shot is so ominous. It could be right out of, someone going to a haunted location. There's a shot. There's a really cool shot. There's a really excellent shot of Okarine looking at the apartment complex. This is at night, of course, right? The second time he goes, because of course, the first time he shows up there, after somehow, getting the address from the person at Arc Rewrite. Now I know exactly, what that is. Somehow, they kind of gave up the address to Okarine. I'm sure he came up with some kind of story, maybe he's a relative or something. But a shot of him arriving at that apartment complex the second time, my goodness, it's good stuff, man. Really good stuff. And then, of course, there is the apartment itself, right? It's presented as this dark and hollow, cold, liminal space, right? And, I've got to say, I really enjoyed that most of the episode, the majority of this episode, is staged there, right? As a two-hander, and you've got Makise on the phone every now and then. But, going back to the apartment itself, isn't that just like the perfect place for a specter, for a ghost, right? A specter that lingers, but never perceived. And in this case, that specter is Kiryu Moeka, right? As the camera kind of pans and shows Kiryu Moeka in that corner, right? Of course, she cuts quite a tragic figure in that corner of the apartment, as if she's just part of the structure, right? It's quite pitiful. As you look at her desperately clinging onto her only outlet, her only connection, or even a semblance of a connection, right? A perceived connection, because it's not really a connection, but for her, it's something, and it's something that she is just desperately hanging on to, right? Trying to hang on to. But of course, as Okarine, lets her know, as he specifies, this is how you end up dying. Desperate, alone, dependent on this person who does not care about you one bit. You end up killing yourself here. And in these moments of desperation, or the depiction of this desperation, you kind of go back to a lot of those moments of her yanking her phone back. First appearance, right? Okarine just asking for the phone so he'll type it in himself, but she yanks it back, and you see then and there that something is a little bit off here, right? Potentially losing access to her phone and ultimately to FB, you kind of get to see that it really truly could be the end of her world if that happened, right? And other moments, in a state of panic as she retreats into a dark alley, right? And then once again, she sees that the notification pop up from FB. You see a smile, a relief kind of overtake, right? And then it goes into the opening theme. Again, this is around the time she gets approached by the cameras, right? Around the satellite that's been launched to the side of the radio building and all of that. But yeah, as far as the tone of it and the atmosphere that's been created in this episode, and a lot of those segments, within the apartment itself, and Kiryu Moeka, and of course, her deranged and desperate behavior really kind of lends to that atmosphere, right? To the tone, the really uneasy and eerie tone of it all. the ominous tone of it all. Yeah, it's good stuff, man. Really excellent stuff. And listen, speaking of excellent stuff, I think I've seen some of the best voice acting work in this episode through the voice actor who plays Kiryu Moeka. My goodness, there's some bone-chilling stuff here, man. It is so authentic. It is so raw and believable. My goodness, it's some of the best I've seen, even beyond Steins Gate, right? And you see that, Okarin, being the person that he is, he does have a big heart. Even though this is someone that has wronged him and the people he loves, you see her breaking down in that manner. Yeah, it gets to him. It's not as if he revels in this moment, right? You see that he takes a moment to pause and he said, "I'm sorry." Now, once again, kind of looking at the structure of this episode, there is a really clear contrast showcased throughout this episode, right? You've got Okabe Rintaro and Kiryu Moeka, right? As far as support systems are concerned, emotional support systems at that, and trajectories, right? There's a lot of overlap here. And it's one of the main reasons why I do think that Okarin actually does understand, to an extent at least, the things that Kiryu Moeka is going through or has gone through. And the contrast begins right up front, doesn't it? I spoke of the cold open earlier. The rooftop scenes are a constant of this story, right? Of this anime. And, beyond just a constant of the story, it's actually quite integral to the story, right? And you see here, it's a bit of a different take, right? It's, again, quite the contrast from the rooftop sequences or scenes I see with Okarin and, in extension, some of his friends. Because for Okarin and friends, it's usually under clear skies and many times under the oppressive sun, right? Painfully bright at times. And then you've got Kiryu Moeka's rooftop scene in the cold open here, right? Shrouded in darkness, overcast, ominous skies. And it's all rather grim, isn't it? And the thing I really liked about that cold open as well is that it really kind of takes you by surprise, doesn't it? Because Kiryu Moeka, she looks a little bit different there, right? Now, of course, later I find out that it's a flashback, but at the time, I thought, I didn't know for sure. I thought maybe this is, in the present or perhaps in the near future, right? That perhaps some things have now played out, and this is the point that Kiryu Moeka finds herself in now, right? This is the situation she finds herself in. But it's a really different look for her. So it's a really interesting, it's a really interesting cold open. Like I said, it really kind of grabs you up front and sets the tone. But circling back to the point about the contrast between the two characters, then you've got Okarin, who's always had his friends, right? His circle of friends. At first, it's quite a tight-knit group. There's only a couple of them. To the point that, Mayuri, back in episode 12, on the rooftop, once again, points out that, it's kind of strange. This past spring, you seem so sad, right? Or you seem so sad earlier this spring, and that the lab used to be so quiet, right? And that there's only the sound or the humming of your computer, right? And then she rifles off, she names one by one all the new members, all the new friends, right? In the extended circle of friends. So he has that, right? He had that. But, before that, according to Mayuri, he was quite down. He was quite sad. And once again, I do think that Okarin sees this and understands that this person doesn't have what he had or has. But then at the same time, she did have a chance to embrace it, right? He actually calls her a fool, right? For essentially not seeing it and not understanding that she was most welcome at the Future Gadgets Lab. She did have a place that she belongs to, that she could belong to, right? They took her in with open arms, especially someone like Mayuri, right? And Okarin just, he thinks to himself, you're such a fool. You had it. Yes, of course, that's it. This Kiryu Moeka doesn't quite remember that because it hasn't happened for her, right? But just, looking at it from Okarin's perspective, Kiryu Moeka, with the same mentality for the most part, did have a chance to be a part of something, right? She was given the chance to be a part of something, to belong. She did belong. I think I even commented on that in the discussions around that time that, these people accepted her for who she is. She was included, right? Ocarine himself made sure to include her, right? And again, that kind of kicked it all off, right? The whole idea of asking her to come up with the next D-mail and all that. And then, of course, she made the request to send a D-mail of her own. And of course, the rest is history. And then it is a major focus of this episode as well, right? A major stumbling block because both Ocarine and Makise are at a loss for a time at least, right? In terms of, why exactly reading Steiner isn't kicking in. And more on that aspect in a bit, and, perhaps some of my nitpicks. Because listen, it's an exceptional episode, but there are some nitpicks here and there. But going back to Ocarine and his support system, his emotional support system, and his circle of friends, beyond that, he does have someone like Makise Kurisu, right? Really unique dynamic here, really unique relationship. His constant in every single timeline, in every single world line. As she made sure to tell him, never forget, whatever world line you're on, you aren't alone. I'm always there for you. So, that right there is just this incredible bond, right? A unique dynamic that transcends reading Steiner and the memory reconstruction element, right? I believe a long time ago at this point, I called them star-crossed lovers. And, yes, of course, there's a romantic angle there that is quite present, but it doesn't even have to be, star-crossed lovers. There's a really brilliant dynamic here, right? And it's so crucial. It's integral for Ocarine, because I think I said it recently as well. If he doesn't have Makise Kurisu as he jumps from timeline to timeline, Ocarine would have been, I think he would have been down and out already. I think he would have tapped out already. But she is there. She is present in every single timeline. And every single time, she's receptive to all of this information, right? So that is so crucial for someone like Okabe, who does have reading Steiner, who does have to explain these things, right? Even on that rooftop, he's almost over all of this, right? I believe he said, how many times have I explained this to you? But the thing is, that's a key component of this. All you have to do is explain it to Makise Kurisu. She's receptive, she understands it, she takes it in, and she's able to immediately provide support, right? And input, much needed input for Okabe. And unfortunately, this is something that Kiryu Moeka simply does not have, or did not have. I mean, she still didn't really have it, right? She was being manipulated, but she believed it up until a certain point. Hell, I'm not, it's still kind of up in the air, isn't it? Like I said, potentially coming face to face with FB, that could bring up a lot of different feelings, right? So let's see how that potentially plays out if that is the case, and if she does kind of get to meet FB face to face. In that showcase, Kiryu Moeka latched on to that first sign of emotional support. But I do want to go back to Kiryu Moeka in her apartment. Again, the shot of her sitting in the corner, in the dark, obsessing over the phone and the messages, right? Answer me. Why won't you answer my messages? And then and there, this cannot be good, right? It really kind of puts you in Okabe's shoes as well. Walking into this situation. And, the crazy thing is she doesn't even notice or care that the door is unlocked and that someone just strolled right in. Thankfully for her, it's just Okabe, right? Yes, there's quite an intense exchange that happens here. It takes place here. But listen, there could be much worse things, much worse people than Okabe Rintaro just walking right in. But her obsessing over FB to this extent, it's quite concerning, isn't it? And it's this unhealthy attachment and dependence. She essentially resembles the behaviors of an addict, right? And, all of this is a deliberate choice by this FB person, like I said a little bit earlier, right? To go radio silent at this point. Because they have a complete understanding of Kiryu Moeka and how exactly this is going to affect her. And, if you look at someone like Kiryu Moeka, someone who is, quite broken, directionless, discarded by society. And, perhaps she has a role to play in that as well, given her nature. Yes, this is clearly a person that is, I don't know, incapable of making some of these connections, right? And that might be due to, severe social anxiety and, perhaps being severely depressed, right? So this right here, it looks almost kind of like a cult recruitment. These are the types of people they tend to target, right? At the end of the day, ultimately, Kiryu Moeka needs professional help. She needed professional help, right? Instead, you've got someone like FB who latched on, or she latched on too, and essentially, literally rescues her from the brink, right? As if it's the hand of God, to then just to use her, to utilize her as a tool, as a pawn, because she's disposable, she's expendable, because she was already ready to check out, right? And there's no ties, there's going to be no one coming around looking for Kiryu Moeka, so it really is a perfect target. But yeah, going back to Okabe coming across Kiryu Moeka and this behavior, and her essentially being in a trance, right? There's that one really brilliant shot of her just typing FB over and over, and you see the reflection in the glasses. Oh, yeah, it's poignant stuff, man. And there, like I said earlier in the discussion, it cuts to Okabe and his expression. He understands, okay, this is quite an obsessive person, right? So ultimately, Okabe decides to do the one thing that he can think of to snap her out of it. And he takes the phone. And my goodness, her reaction to that is just chilling, isn't it? Right? It starts a full-on struggle, a tussle, and causes all kinds of commotion and noise. And of course, there's a bit of a comedic element, a bit of dark comedy perhaps incorporated into the scene itself. Though, it's a bit far-fetched if you really kind of try to break it down. That lady, the neighbor, the old lady, there's no chance she could have, walked away from that and just chalk it up to, couples being scary in this day and age, right? But, you kind of have to allow some of these things. But yeah, the whole struggle is so rough to watch. It's a tough watch. It really is. Given Kiryu Moeka's reaction, the desperation on her face, the panicked state, it almost felt like a baby has been taken away from their mother, right? That's how she's trying to fight back for the phone and, that semblance of connection, that tiny glimmer of hope. Because again, this is her only connection to FB. And then of course, it kind of gets to that point of Okabe lashing out, kind of reaching that boiling point and remembering her role in Mayuri's death, countless times at this point, given how many times, or again, the countless times he's time-leapt at this point, and he clocks her as hard as he can, and then he kicks her as well, right? And that kind of sets off the next phase, sending the D-mail, right? Sending a counter D-mail, but then that also kind of hitting a brick wall. And then, of course, throughout that whole segment, you've got Kiryu Moeka inside of the apartment just fighting like she's never fought before to get that phone back, right? There's a fire about Kiryu Moeka. And then, of course, finally the big moment, right? The big revelation. Though, again, it's not much of a shocker, is it, for most of us, that indeed, she bamboozled them. That's been really quite clear for some time now. And this right here is one of those nitpicks that I do have, right? And it applies to more than just this, specific segment. This idea that neither Okabe or Kurisu even entertain the notion that, Kiryu Moeka could have, fooled them, could have bamboozled them, especially given that they know full on that she does betray them, right? So, given how intelligent these characters are, this right here, it doesn't quite check out. Them not even questioning it and them actually being completely bamboozled by this, this notion that, oh, she changed it at the last moment. So yeah, ultimately, neither of them questioning Moeka's motives for the D-mail after understanding that she played a part in Mayuri's death in, this ultimate betrayal. Yeah, it's a bit far-fetched. It is a bit far-fetched. I think these two characters are far too intelligent to not even think of that possibility, right? To bring it up. But, that's that. Let's kind of move on to how this kind of plays out, But yeah, Okarin really goes through it this episode, right? Because, on multiple occasions, he thought this is it. This is it. After sending this email and, potentially countering it, Kiryu Moika's own email, that, it'll put him on the track towards saving Mayuri, right? In the final stretch and all of that. But, even before that, before he time leaps, coming across the apartment and seeing, again, the yellow tape and the police presence. Yeah, there, the idea that a D-mail is lost forever. Ooh, that's quite a tough pill. That's a really tough pill to swallow, isn't it? But of course, after being stunned for a few moments, he does remember that, yes, he can just kind of time leap again before Kiryu Moika takes her life. But then, of course, before he can time leap, he has to catch himself, right? Because he has to stick around. He has to stick around until he gets a confirmation, until he gets a call. And my goodness, it's a call and then some, because on the other side of that call, or on the other end of that call, is Makise Kirisu, just completely shattered. Again, some fantastic voice acting on display, right? Hearing about it from Okarin is one thing, that, Mayuri is going to die imminently. But then to be there in person, to actually see it go down and just be so helpless in those moments. Yeah, you get a strong sense of that through the phone call. And the thing is, Okarin has been there. He understands, right? Even though he's still quite, he's still quite calculated in that moment, but he understands exactly what Makise is going through, because he had that, he's been there. But now, again, one of the more sad things about this, or one of the more, sad sights, is to see Okabe become almost numb to the idea of Mayuri's death. You see that he almost kind of looks at it as an experiment at this point, right? To observe the time of death. It's just all quite professional and cold at this point, right? Because ultimately, at this point, he understands that he has to focus on the bigger picture, right? It's, those countless time leaps. Yeah, he got it out of his system, and it probably took a long time, but he understands, right? He understands that now he has to focus on the bigger picture. And of course, the bigger picture being saving Mayuri for good, right? Preventing this for good. But again, yeah. Listen, man, the episodes are running out at this point, sooner or later. And I'm guessing, quite soon at this point, I certainly hope so, he's going to realize the other brick wall he's about to run into, right? The death of Makise Kirisu. But once again, let's return to Kiryu Moika's apartment, right? And this is after the old lady neighbor leaves, and Kiryu Moika bites his lip. And at that point, Okarin asked her if she remembers sending a D-mail. Now, I also think, part of this question is to kind of gauge if there is a bit more of that, residual memories bleeding in. And in this case, in Kiryu Moika's case, there's no evidence of it at all. There's nothing. There's quite an interesting stylistic approach, during her flashback. It's the same sound effect, sound design that I'm quite, familiar with anytime, Okarin, reading Steiner kicks in, right? Those sparks, that sound effect of those sparks, initial sparks of it. So I thought it was a really interesting stylistic choice. At this point, I'm just assuming it's a stylistic choice and nothing more than that. So yeah, looking at this notion of, residual memories leaking in and, memories lived and gained kind of blending together, right? As showcased in Ferris's episode, in Ruka's episode, right? There, like I said, these are meant to be really distinct before and after moments, be it for Ferris, the life and death of her father. And then, of course, for Ruka, remembering how life is and was as a biological male. So, looking at it now and seeing that there's nothing of the sort present in this episode, Kiryu Moika doesn't experience any of that. It does kind of begin to feel a tad bit convenient, doesn't it, that it happened for those two specifically, but it hasn't happened for Kiryu Moika. Now, listen, yes, it could come down to this notion of those two having a bit more of a connection to Okarin. Maybe, but there's still some time yet for a possible explanation on the whole, residual memories bleeding through, and is that because of their connection to Okarin? Is it because Okarin is present? I mean, that was one of my main readings of the situation, that it's facilitated through Okarin being in close proximity, right? Him being the constant and all of that. But even before he asked about the D-mail, right? If she remembers sending a D-mail, and of course she's quite puzzled about the whole thing. There's that moment. She kind of calms down a bit, and she said, "What can I do to make you give it back?" At that moment, you can just see it. You can just tell this is someone who is so desperate that they'll do anything, right? But then you see it's almost anything, because betraying FB isn't one of those things, right? So as desperate as she seemed, and as open as she seemed to doing anything to get that phone back, betraying FB was not on the cards. And it is really quite sad to see this type of loyalty, right? And you see that Okarin can't stand it either, because he understands, she's being used, she's being manipulated, she's been discarded, right? He has knowledge, right? He understands, he knows how things play out for Kiryu Moika, and he tells her as much as well. A few days from now, you hang yourself in this apartment. And, I see the imagery as well. I mean, they don't shy away from it. I've seen, like I said, it's a bit of a running theme, a reoccurring theme of this anime, of this story. And then, of course, from that point on, Okarin begins to take that really aggressive approach to break through to her, right? This FB of yours doesn't give a damn about you. FB has abandoned you. You've lost all contact, right? You've been betrayed. You've been discarded. You've been tossed aside. And then, of course, it crescendos with him saying stuff like, "You, Mayuri's killer," right? All alone, abandoned, and betrayed like a piece of garbage. It's rough, man. It's rough. This whole segment is kind of rough, and I certainly didn't feel any gratification from this. Once you gain an understanding for, her past, and just how much of a struggle it's been for her, and how she's been manipulated. But yeah, like I mentioned before, incredible voice acting as she breaks down, big breakthrough moment. It's really uncomfortable, isn't it? It makes you really quite uncomfortable just to sit there and listen to it, right? That's how authentic and raw it feels. And then, of course, once Okarin gets her phone, he finally comes across the D-mail, and I get my official confirmation as well. It is the location of the IBN 5100 and instructions to procure it at once, right? Again, no shocker there, right? It really isn't a shocker. But it's out there now, officially, right? So again, Okarin tries to counter it by sending another D-mail, but still, it's not good enough. And I like that it is kind of dabbling in this now, right? That it's not an airtight system, this idea, this notion of sending follow-up D-mails. Like Makise brought up in this episode as well, it really kind of rests on the person who receives the D-mail and how they, choose to proceed, right? Or if they choose to proceed at all, right? They could just simply ignore it. And at that point, it becomes clear that, okay, the only person Kiryu Moika is going to listen to is FB, right? So it has to go through FB. And that is one of the main reasons why I think, an appearance by FB is right around the corner, right? That it might be imminent, because ultimately it has to go through FB's phone. So, it's quite exciting that it simply has to be soon, because that's the next thing they have to do. That's the next D-mail in line. But ultimately, Okarin's defiant declaration at that point, I refuse to accept that. And again, this is after he said, "The world has set your death in stone. There's no escaping it." Again, that directly applies to Mayuri as well, right? I will save Mayuri. I'm going to fight the world, right? This display of loyalty and love for an actual friend, a loved one, Kiryu Moika gets to see that this is how people care about each other. All of this kind of finally did something for Kiryu Moika, right? This proactive nature of Okarin's crusade, right? It kind of opened up her eyes right near the conclusion there. And of course, that leads to her finally revealing the coin locker and, the location of the IBN 5100. It's a great ending. Great ending. and perhaps finally facing the grim reality of this bizarre, one-sided relationship she's had with FB, right? And, all of this arguably broke her even further, but it was the first step in detaching from this. But again, the specter of FB still looms quite large, right? And also right around the corner, most likely, really quite imminent. So any potential meetup, any potential confrontation still promises to be quite intriguing, right? Especially if Kiryumoika is present. I think, from a writing perspective, it makes a lot of sense to have Kiryumoika confront FB, right, alongside Okabe. So I'm certainly hoping for that. But yeah, like I said a little bit earlier, Kiryumoika needs therapy, right? She needs help, professional help for her mental health issues. Because ultimately, this is a person that has great difficulty in making social connections, right? And you see that she's been deprived of bonds and, these experiences, these necessary experiences at that. But yeah, man, I've got to say, a really, really strong episode. And finally, a much needed examination and focus of Kiryumoika, right? And, just to reiterate, yes, I can be critical of some of her choices. Any of us can be critical of some of her choices, but I most definitely pity Kiryumoika as well. Empathy. This requires quite a bit of empathy. But yeah, that should do it for this one, folks. If you enjoyed that, consider dropping a like, consider dropping some comments, give me your thoughts. If you are interested in early access to the next few episodes right now, or perhaps full opacity, no opacity masks, and perhaps time-based full length, if you're interested in any of those things, consider checking out the link in the description and the pinned comment. Right then, thank you so much for joining me, folks, and thank you for your time, because time is precious. And I do hope to see you again soon for episode 20. Until then, take it easy.